Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kimberly Guilfoyle Show, live on Rumble, where facts come first and where news is done right. And we begin with big breaking news in the financial markets, where the European Commission president said in Brussels earlier today that the EU stands ready to negotiate a zero-for-zero tariff pact with the United States. Watch.
To negotiate with the United States. Indeed, we have offered zero-for-zero tariffs for industrial goods, as we have successfully done with many other trading partners, because Europe is always ready for a good deal, so we keep it on the table. But we are also prepared to respond through countermeasures and defend our interests.
And that's not all. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in a statement just moments ago that, quote, following a very constructive phone discussion with the government of Japan, President Trump has tasked me and the U.S. trade rep to open negotiations to implement the president's vision for the new golden age of global trade with Japan. And furthermore, over 50 countries have responded both openly and positively to President Trump's historic action to create a fairer, more prosperous system of global trade. And if China wants to remain isolated and not come to the table, well, then they can suffer the consequences. And despite the noise, many American business owners are excited about the future. Take a look.
Able to sell your product to?
Well, the European community has been a big market that we'd love to get to, and certainly Australia is another one that sells lots of beef here in the United States, but we don't get to sell to them.
How does this moment in time feel like a game changer for your industry?
Well, I think we're happy that the president finally singled us out and said that we do need to increase our beef sales to other countries, and that he's going to try and make an effort to do that. So it'll be a great time for our industry if we can sell more and have a better market and higher prices.
And here at home, we are reordering trade and our financial systems so that they actually work towards the benefit of everyday common sense Americans. For decades, the swamp's approach favored multinational corporations and abstract globalist ideals over the tangible needs of American workers and communities. And this same core principle of protecting the rights of ordinary Americans against powerful, often unaccountable systems also extends directly into the fight against politically motivated debanking. Just as unfair trade deals can harm marginalized citizens, financial institutions targeting individuals based on their political views represent a profound threat to personal liberty. Here is Senator Tim Scott recently laying out the president's agenda on the issue. Watch.
Trump also had the agenda to stop the weaponization of government, and tomorrow in the banking hearing, we will have a hearing on debanking and how the Biden administration weaponized the regulatory environment to stop banking industries and individuals, and we'll have a serious conversation about that tomorrow.
And joining me now, Senior Counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom, Attorney Jerry Tedesco. Thank you so much for being on the program. We're really happy to have you today. A lot of important developments. You know, we're seeing the Trump administration make a deliberate effort to reorient our trade and our financial systems to actually work for the people, shocking enough. It is truly a sharp shift to strengthen our ability to allow our middle class to prosper and flourish. And our financial institutions are at the very center, the epicenter of this. So what's the broader mosaic here between trade, protecting businesses, and restoring integrity to the financial sector?
Well, what's really been happening is that big banks have been weaponized by powerful political forces to bypass or try to do an end run around the political process. So if you don't like the outcome at the election, if you can get the biggest banks in the world to decide to deplatform people or debank people for political reasons, you don't like their speech, you don't like what they stand for in the broader political conversation, then it doesn't matter what the outcome of the election is, because if you can't get a bank account or if you can't get access to loans, that has a serious deterrent effect on your ability and freedom and willingness to speak and promote the ideas that are at the center of your organization or your own, personal convictions. Mm-hmm. And so, we're dealing with a situation where banks have become too big to fail, and they're also too big for bias. And so there need to be regulatory, legislative fixes to this The banks also need to change their own behavior and policies because there's really two things that contribute to this. Maybe that's too simple, but there's the overreach of government regulators who are forcing banks to debank people for political reasons. And then there's the banks themselves who have vague policies that allow them to kind of weaponize their services against customers whose views they don't like. And so sometimes it's pressure from regulators, sometimes it's internal or external forces that are, pushing these banks to debank people that someone disagrees with. But it's a problem that has to be solved because nobody should have to show up at their bank account, at the grocery store or at the gas station, run their card and find out that their account has been canceled.
Terrible. It's terrible. For far too long, regulations and policy, right? It benefited the so-called ruling class, right? That was the word. At the expense of everyday Americans. But there seems now to be a unique, a real tangible opportunity to change that. What are the stories that need to be told and how does it impact directly, the work that you are doing?
Sure. I mean, one of the most compelling stories is our client, Indigenous Advanced Ministries, a small Tennessee-based nonprofit that does relief work in Uganda. They help orphans, they help widows, they help pull people out of sex trafficking, they build schools. I mean, they just do amazing work for some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And a few years ago, Bank of America decided to debank them, just out of the blue. They had an account there for 8 years, and Bank of America sent them a notice saying, you're no longer a customer here. You've got 30 days to find someplace else to do banking. And this imposed an enormous problem on the ministry and especially on the people they served in Uganda. They weren't sure how they were going to pay their bills. They weren't sure how they were going to meet the needs of the people in Uganda for a period of time as they tried to sort through this very difficult loss of their bank accounts. So, that was a situation where, they were told, well, your risk profile has exceeded our risk tolerance, and we don't want to do business with your business type anymore. Well, those are excuses that don't make any sense. They don't really mean anything. They're just evasions for why they really were debanking the ministry. So, that ended up with a great story from an outcome standpoint, because in the end, Tennessee passed a law, a model piece of legislation that Alliance Defending Freedom, where I work, came up with, that now imposes a non-discrimination rule on some of the largest banks in the country in Tennessee. So Tennessee citizens are protected from that kind of debanking moving forward. But this problem is much broader than that. We know that many family members of Donald Trump have been debanked. We know of other nonprofits that have been debanked. All the time, typically under this kind of like reputation risk or your risk profile is too high. And those are the kinds of policies that allow for viewpoint-based debanking. And so we are working very hard to get banks to eliminate those policies from their own, policy manuals and codes of conduct. But we're also putting pressure on the regulators at the federal level to stop forcing banks or using reputation risk to try to push banks to debank certain industries or people.
It's really terrible. I'm telling you, because we suffered, discrimination like this, and we both, Don and I both have great credit, and it was a massive challenge to even get a mortgage, because no one would take us. And this is after, 2020 election, et cetera. And you just can't even imagine it. You work so hard your whole life, good person, great credit, all across the board, the financials are good, good income coming in, et cetera, et cetera. And to think about it, it's so un-American that people can be discriminated against in this fashion and in this way, or prevented even from opening a bank account to get a basic ATM card, et cetera. It's unbelievable to me. I don't want it to happen to any other American. I don't care what your political persuasion is, your identity politics, your ideology, whatever it is. That's not how it should work. Well, when did this whole banking system become so politicized?
Well, it's really been happening for years. It probably started under the Obama administration, maybe before then, but definitely under the Obama administration with Operation Choke Point, which was really the first time that the federal regulators used reputation risk to target legal businesses that they just politically disfavored and put pressure on banks to start depriving them of services. And so that really became part of the reality for banks being pressured by regulators. But if you go back to late 2018, 2019, some of the banks didn't like the outcome of the presidential election where Donald Trump won in 2016. And so they started using their services to combat some of the election results. For instance, Donald Trump had immigration policies that called for private prison companies to participate in their immigration policies. And the banks decided to debank the private prison companies in an attempt to essentially do an end run around the election outcome and policies that the administration was pursuing on behalf of the American people that the banks just happen to not like. So the banks shouldn't be involved in trying to decide, what rules should be followed in society, who should be able to get access to financial services and who shouldn't. That should be an equal playing field for all people who are involved in legal activity. But that's not the way it's played out. And so we really think that there need to be rules in place now, a congressional statute that bars discrimination on the basis of political or religious views. We need the regulators at OCC, FDIC, and other federal regulatory agencies that have purview over the banking industry to not use reputation risk anymore in those supervision of those banks. And we also need the banks themselves to instill a culture of non-discrimination and viewpoint neutrality within their own employees and policies. And so, I think that's the fix to all this. How we get there is going to be a combination of a lot of efforts. It's going to be, President Trump leading on this issue as he has, calling Brian Moynihan, the president of Bank of America, to the carpet at the World Economic Forum over the way Bank of America has debanked American citizens and conservatives especially. But we need Congress like Senator Scott and some of the regulators to really lead in reforming the system, which has been weaponized against the American people.
No, you're right about that. And this needs to happen ASAP, like 1,700 other issues. But we've seen our own government and, major corporations focus on things like DEI, while you have American cities and towns become hollowed out, which is really tragic. So you're an attorney like me, but what are the legal tools that we have to actually get our priorities straight to deliver on the Trump agenda and improve the well-being of our citizens?
Well, I mean, in this context, I think there needs to be a couple things done. One, there needs to be exposure of the problem. So one of the things we've done is filed FOIA requests with a bunch of relevant agencies who have been involved in government pressure to debank under the Biden administration. We want the information so we can actually expose it and reveal to the American people just the way kind of this censorship comes about from the way of government pressure. And then we need the reforms to take place. Now, I think, President Trump has an opportunity to issue executive orders on debanking that could direct the agencies especially to take specific actions related to reputation risk and ending its use, but also, other things that the agencies can do from an internal policy change perspective to protect American citizens. We also need Congress to pass statutes reforming, one, imposing kind of this non-discrimination rule on the biggest banks. So there's no more discrimination based on religion or politics in the banking industries. But they also need to reform the Bank Secrecy Act, which the banks and the federal government have kind of collaborated to use as a weapon, to effectively surveil or, ultimately do a kind of an overreach and bring in sweep Americans into the criminal law process simply because of their protected activities. And so there's a host of reforms I think can make a huge difference that should be a top priority for the Trump administration. I think the other thing that American citizens need to understand is just how easily you can get swept into this. We got swept into it at Alliance Defending Freedom when the Department of Treasury, FinCEN, an agency within the Department of Treasury, worked with the big banks back during January 6th, in the aftermath of January 6th, and they were purporting to identify domestic violent extremists. But what they told the banks to do was to surveil their customers' private data and look for indicators that were basically based on their constitutionally protected activity. Were they buying religious texts? Were they shopping at Cabela's or Bass Pro Shops? And we got swept into it when FinCEN, this Treasury Department agency, shared a report that was about bankrolling bigotry, and it was this report that was basically one of these left-wing blacklists that we were on. And it basically said,
Crazy.
look, if ADF or any donor is transacting business to ADF in your private financial records, tell us about those people too. And the assumption was these people were going to be put on a domestic violent extremist list. So you're buying guns, you're shopping at Bass Pro Shops, you're buying religious texts, you're giving to religious nonprofits. Under the Biden administration, you could become a domestic violent extremist.
I'm sure we're on there.
It's a huge problem, and it needs
It's
to
like
stop.
what we do any given Tuesday. So we've heard from Republican Congress that, stopping debanking is in fact the top priority. Okay. What does that actually mean to you? And who is the person, the individual, the entity, et cetera, that actually has the power to stop it? Is the answer found in all the branches of government, or where do you think that it's like centrally located?
Well, I think congressional reform of the banking industry is probably the most important thing. So we really need statutory protections and reform put in place. So the protections would be taking some of the work that we've been doing in the states where we've been successful in Tennessee and Idaho, getting those states to pass laws that say the biggest banks in the world, $100 billion plus in assets, cannot discriminate against customers based on their political activity, their religious activity or expression, based on whether they're involved in some kind of disfavored industry like oil and gas and things like that. There needs to be a rule that says discrimination on those grounds by banks is not going to be tolerated. So that's kind of the affirmative protection side of it. And then there needs to be reforms to the way that things are being done right now. And I think, while some of the agencies can do a lot of good work, like OCC and FDIC and CFPB, by pulling reputation risk out of their guidance documents, not using it anymore in supervisory relationships with banks, that really needs to be a congressional fix as well. Congress needs to say, no longer will reputation risk be used as a category of supervision, because that's where all the political discrimination
Well, that whole
is
PEP
happening
thing,
from the
politically
regulators.
exposed person, all of
Yep.
that. How many times have I heard that? How many times have I heard that? It's just unbelievable. And it's just, I don't know, it just smacks in the face of like fairness and equality and just being able to, be treated, all people being treated the same, applying and making it based on specific standards and finances and all of the above. Let's dive a little deeper into how the Treasury or what departments that can actually take action and right these wrongs. Is this an administrative law process, or how do you see it?
Well, I think it probably starts with an executive order, or if not that, then pressure from the White House on the agencies, just setting the agenda with those agencies that this isn't going to be tolerated anymore, and to look very intently within these agencies' purview. Definitely Treasury is involved, SEC for sure, and then also the OCC and the FDIC and those agencies to change their guidance documents, to adopt rules that prevent these things happening from their own employees in these supervisory relationships they have with the banks. I mean, understand the supervisory relationship is not like some, every quarter we check in. I mean, it's essentially like having a federal employee sitting in your bank, constantly overseeing the way in which you're doing business. A great example of this is what happened in New York when the New York comptroller just last year, their case was at the U.S. Supreme Court involving the NRA, had used their supervisory power to pressure financial institutions and insurance agencies to debank and deinsure the NRA.
Yeah.
And there was just an enormous amount of pressure put on the financial institutions through New York's power to do that. And some of them followed through on those threats. This is the exact same thing that's been happening at the federal level. And that abuse is always present at the federal level unless and until the agencies involved in the supervisory process pull back on the politicized nature of some of what they're doing, end reputation risk as a category of assessment of bank behavior, and commit to this kind of non-discriminatory, politically neutral approach to everybody should be able to get access to financial services, regardless of their political or religious views, so long as they're involved in illegal activity.
I totally agree. How does this fit into sort of the broader mission of ADF, and what have been the major, I guess like good signs or indicators thus far in the president's first almost 100 days.
Yeah, well, debanking is a massive risk, and it's really coupled with deplatforming. So we're working on both those issues, and they're very related, and in a lot of ways that we've already been talking about. Because the government lots of times is pressuring the tech companies or the big banks to debank or deplatform, and also the tech companies and the banks have these terrible policies that allow their own employees, without any pressure from government or some external entity, to debank or deplatform because they don't like the person or their views.
Right.
And so
Very
for us,
discriminatory on its face.
yeah, and for us, the reason we're involved with it, like our history is fighting government discrimination, fighting the government when it engages in speech discrimination or religious discrimination. But we were seeing so much more of this happening from private corporations, publicly traded big companies, big tech and big finance. And our diagnosis was that when big tech and big finance can cancel you or shut down your expression, it's just as big of a threat. It's just as chilling to your willingness to engage in those fundamental freedoms as if the government was doing it. And not only that, but we knew that left-wing activists were really trying to co-opt businesses to do an end run around our First Amendment rights and around the outcome of elections, around democratic accountability.
Yeah.
So we're almost fighting half the battle if you're not fighting to protect these freedoms in the C-suite, in the boardrooms, these publicly traded companies. So, how we fix that problem is certainly, there's a lot of different tools that you can bring to bear. Some of it is changing the law, like we've been talking about, having the Trump administration lead and Congress lead on some of these reforms. But one of the other things we do is we engage these corporations directly through the shareholder proxy process. And so we will file shareholder resolutions on behalf of conservative and religious shareholders, which oftentimes generate meetings for us and for the shareholders with members of the C-suite, and we're able to talk about these issues and even drive to policy changes. Through that work this year, we've had 13 policy changes at major corporations. So, yeah, I think it's going to take all those lines of effort to fix the problem.
So what is any current litigation we should keep our eyes on, and what are some of your top, benchmarks as you see them today for success in the months ahead?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I mentioned the public records requests we've sent.
Yeah.
There could be litigation that results from that. The outcome of those are going to be really critical because that's going to help us map the way in which the federal government and these private entities kind of work together to debank and deplatform people. So we have to get a full picture of the way this kind of the censorship sausage is made in order to unravel.
Did you just say censorship sausage? That's so funny.
And so that's going to be critical, and I think that's something to watch. We have a free speech litigation team now that we just set up. That's
Tell us about
dedicated to tackling these problems. So they have. Do you remember when Facebook came out and said we're going to recommit to free speech? Well, literally like a day after those announcements came out, where we were all kind of skeptical of that, we sent a demand letter to them saying, look, you deplatformed 2 pro-life users on Meta, on Facebook, and clearly discriminatory, clearly in violation of this recommitment to free speech, and threatened them with litigation. They immediately turned around and restored those accounts and apologized for it. But you're going to see more of that kind of activity from us, trying to ensure that these companies that have good free speech policies or have recommitted to free speech are held accountable to those things. We also filed a lawsuit recently against Asana, California corporation, because what they do is they exclude religious nonprofits from their nonprofit pricing program. So that team is leading a free speech and religious discrimination case against Asana. Now, this is not something that's just only an Asana policy. We see a lot of big tech companies and just big American companies have these really odd policies and many times illegal policies that exclude religious nonprofits from benefit programs like that. So you're going to see more litigation like that too. So, on the debanking front, there's not a lot of litigation in play right now. I think the solutions are really going to be legislative and regulatory. I'd keep your eye on whether executive orders come out from President Trump on that issue, where the congressional investigations and hearings are going to lead. There's been several good pieces of legislation introduced by Senator Scott and others. And so And we've also already seen the OCC, FDIC, and a couple other regulatory agencies start to pull back a little bit on
That's
reputation
great. Good
risk.
progress.
So we need to see
Yeah.
more of that.
Okay, good. So we're making some, progress on the reputation risk front, et cetera, with these agencies. All right, it's going better than I even thought, and that's why I wanted to have this, intelligent and informed conversation, because Americans care about this. And like when you've experienced this discrimination firsthand, and you feel it for your family, for your children, et cetera, it is really awful. And I don't want it to happen to anybody else. I know how it feels. And then one bank after the next, like rejects you. Like, what are we going to do here? It's craziness. But the work you do is very important. I'd like you to finish up by telling everyone where they can get involved, find out more information, get involved with your group, contact, et cetera, and also where they can find you.
Best place to go is adflegal.org. That's our website. We also have a great X handle where you can get information up to date on what we're doing. And a great follow is Kristen Wagner, our CEO. She talks about all these issues that we work on, including debanking, and she's putting out great content every day.
That's wonderful. I love it. Strong, smart people supporting one another, and you got a great female CEO. Jeremy, what a pleasure it's been to be with you today, and I really appreciate you making the time to talk to us and inform us and educate us.
Thanks, Kimberly. Appreciate it.
All right, be well. And we're going to continue following all of this because it's very important. And coming up, we'll have much more on all the big breaking financial news. But first, free speech is under attack. Rumble refuses to back down. We have always believed in empowering independent voices, and now Rumble is taking it to the next level. We are excited to offer Rumble Premium, a completely ad-free experience with exclusive benefits for viewers and creators. And it's more than a subscription. It is a stand for free speech. Your voice matters. Please join Rumble Premium today. For a limited time, you can get $10 off an annual plan using promo code, this is a winner right here, KG10. So just visit rumble.com/premium/KG10 and you can claim and enjoy your discount today. Again, that's rumble.com/premium/KG10. Now, business owners across the country are actually welcoming a shift in strategy to put American businesses first when it comes to global trade. Here's one small sample. Watch.
Up. We're going to keep them, right where they are. We have plenty of inventory on ground. We got cars incoming.
And more than just holding the line on prices, Orsini said he sees the need for Trump's tariffs, which the president says are a way to help rebuild America's industrial base, including the auto industry.
If you drive up to Michigan or go to these places where, the American cars were being built years ago, it's very dead up there now. A lot of empty buildings, a lot of empty factories.
We didn't have to go all the way to Michigan to find a manufacturer hurt by foreign competition. The president of Taconic Wire in North Branford told us her family business, which produces stitching wire for a range of industries, has lost clients to China for years, and they're already seeing a turnaround.
We've actually been inundated with our customers calling in now, looking to buy wire from us once again, now that the tariffs have gone into effect.
Well, by rewriting the status quo on trade, utilizing tariffs, and encouraging domestic manufacturing, the aim is to ensure that America's engagement in the global economy directly translates into better jobs, higher wages, and increased prosperity for its own citizens. And joining us now, Senior Director of the Center on Economic and Financial Power, great title, former official at the Export-Import Bank, Elaine Dezensky. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Hi, Kim. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So first of all, if I want to get your big picture assessment on this reorienting of trade, it seems that this is a direct message to China that business as usual is over.
Absolutely. China is at the center of all of this, and we really need to keep the focus on that, on the U.S.-China relationship and how distorted it's become over the last decade in particular. When we look at how China uses non-market tactics to subsidize, to steal IP, to use forced labor, and many other kind of non-market type approaches, it has become impossible for many U.S. businesses to compete against that set of non-market practices. And I think that's what these tariffs are really all about at the end of the day. We are trying to force a behavior shift. We need to do that. It is unlikely that China will do everything that we need it to do
Right.
To come back into a global trade order that's closer to free trade, which we all want.
They're not
And
predisposed to
absent
do
that,
you
they
know?
need to be pushed out of the system.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, they're not going to do anything that doesn't benefit China's interest. They've been China first forever, and finally we're like catching up and being America first, but they're not predisposed to do the right thing. That's not how they operate, and it's not inherent in sort of their fabric and DNA, so to speak, as a country. What opportunity is there to restore American strength in the economic sector? You know, just how much like of so-called free trade, you know, wasn't as free as we were told?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's huge opportunity. We have a lot of things working in our favor. We have an excellent geography. We have an educated population. We have a lot of capital. We have a lot of manufacturing. We could have more. We have good relations with a lot of countries around the world. And I know it's a bit of a challenge around the tariff conversation, but we have a core set of working relationships with many countries, which I think will weather through this storm. So we have all the inputs that we need to rethink and, as you said, reorient the trade system for the benefit of more people. And that's what we need to do. I grew up in Michigan, outside of Detroit. I know what the auto industry went through in the 80s and even into the 90s. That degradation of our industrial base, that was really, really painful for a lot of people. And that's just one example. We know that story. We shouldn't be repeating these stories. We need to think about the future, what kind of domestic production we want to bring to this country or revitalize here. Maybe we don't need to do it in every industry. It doesn't mean we don't need trade relationships, but for critical manufacturing, for critical minerals, for drones and other pieces of the defense industrial base, these are dependencies that we do not want on a regime that isn't in any way interested in our success.
What are some of the examples of America, you know, not being treated fairly or equally as a nation in this global trade framework?
Well, that's a very good question. I think we have to look beyond the tariff conversation and go back to what we were talking about with respect to non-market practices. These are the hidden aspects of how countries like China have kind of bobbed and weaved within the global trading order. So kind of professing to be part of the free and open trade system, but working in ways that are actually very counter to the rules that have been established around the global trading regime. And this is where it starts to get really sticky, when the opacity around how goods are made, whether they're using forced labor, for example, become obscured because we don't see into certain supply chains, or we don't uphold the rules that are necessary, right, for transparency, for fair play. And so I think ultimately what we're trying to do is get back to that. It's very difficult to do that without having a reset. So my hope is that, you know, our allies and partners out there, and we still have many, will see this in the vein of resetting the global trading system in a way that's more beneficial for everyone. Because I have to say, what we're facing with respect to the China relationship isn't just a US problem. It's a problem for every country that trades with China.
That's
Where are all the cheap goods going if they're not coming to the US? Well, they're going to go to Europe because they buy a lot too.
You know, what do you expect, you know, the reaction from China to be? Can Beijing even support itself long term without unfettered access to the US market?
Well, I think there's a lot of deflationary pressure right now, whether we're talking about the real estate bubble that has burst in China, their demographic challenges, and then the continued push of capital into this export-driven model. There's a point at which that simply won't work anymore. And again, I think that's kind of what the president is saying, that the game needs to be over.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, it's enough. The gig is up. So what further action, to that point, can the administration take to protect our critical institutions, and supply chains from Chinese influence, whether it be in the manufacturing, agriculture, real estate, as you mentioned, those sectors, and, ultimately just what's at stake.
Yeah. So we do need more transparency around Chinese investment in this country. So you've mentioned a couple of examples. The administration put out a really interesting document a few weeks ago called the America First Investment Policy, and it actually lays out the guardrails around how we're going to be thinking about foreign direct investment coming into the U.S. It gives preference to allies and partners. It gives preference to those who are willing to play by more transparent rules when it comes to supporting investment in the U.S. economy. And we're already seeing a lot of foreign direct investment coming into the U.S., which is absolutely critical to this reorientation. We need to get that domestic capital flowing and foreign direct investment. But with respect to Chinese investment, we need to make sure that they're not coming in as majority owners, particularly around critical technologies and supply chains. We need to make sure that there's transparency in terms of their ownership structures. We want to make sure that they're not transshipping their goods through countries like Vietnam and Mexico and others. So there's a lot of work to be done to really strengthen those guardrails while we encourage more capital to come into this country, which is still a good bet and a safe bet and important for manufacturing.
And what about soft power investments? How long will it take to kind of wean the nation from the faltering, globalization America found itself consumed with for far too long?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think soft power is happening in many different ways. One could think about soft power as anything other than military action. Okay. So we're in a moment that's very much economically driven, right? We have an administration that has said, we're not interested in the long wars. We're not really interested in committing troops unless absolutely necessary. We want to move away from spending so much money on security guarantees. It's still important to have security guarantees, but it's also important that we use economic power in the right way for the benefit of the U.S. Economy, but also for other economies. That's still part of what we can do and what we should do, but it has to be around the right set of rules. So that's what we need to reinforce through soft power mechanisms, through our diplomacy, through our investments abroad. All of that needs to be aligned in a way that is much more structured around our economic security.
Okay, well, our toolkit is far superior to China's in the long run if we align trade correctly and we maintain leverage over them. But what does that leverage realistically look like? And, how much does the messenger matter?
Well, I think our biggest tool, if you will, is the fact that we're the consumer of choice, right? We're the consumer of first resort and often the consumer of last resort. So that does give us a tremendous amount of leverage. And of course, that's what's playing out right now in terms of the tariff conversation. And so, looking beyond that, though, we have a full range of tools that we can use, from export controls to sanctions to investment review to, as we touched on, soft power tools where we can push our foreign investment strategies in ways that are very helpful to those that are aligned around this trading regime that is more free, more open, and ultimately much more fair.
Yeah, I mean, what do you see going forward, even through the next, let's say, 100 days? What you would like to see happen, where you think we are today, where we need to go?
Yeah, well, I think we're still at stage one, and that's important to keep in mind. I do think there's probably some negotiation happening, but I doubt there's going to be much with China. And that's exactly right. We need to get that piece of this puzzle, which is driving most of this risk in the global system. We have to get that under control. Beyond that, I do think there will be opportunities for our historic trading partners and new trading partners to talk to us about what they are looking for in the relationship, what we can do together. So I would imagine those doors are not closed. They can't be closed, again, because we live in a global trading environment, and trade can be good for this country, but it has to be managed in a much different way.
Yeah, it really does. And I think, but we're off to a good start. It's most auspicious, but like you said, we are in stage one of that, but it's a good beginning and certainly a very good pathway to follow and proceed forward on. So that's good. And Elaine, we love having you on the show. Thank you so much. We look forward to having you back. Tell people where they can find you, get more information.
Will do. Thank you very much.
But where can they find you, sweetheart?
Oh, sorry. FDD.org. So the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, FDD.org. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Well done. Well done. All right. Be good. And my closing remarks just ahead. She's the only person that doesn't want to promote herself on this show. You got to love that. She's a 10. She's a 10. All right. Also be sure to check out the good folks over at 1775 Coffee Company. We talk about it all the time. Don't compromise on taste, quality, or your values. 1775 Coffee is brewed to perfection, crafted with precision, and it is built on patriotism. The farm to cup process means there is quality, authenticity, and sustainability from start to finish. All the beans are ethically and exclusively single sourced. So why not try 1775 Coffee today? Go to 1775coffee.com/KG for 15% off of your first order. You will love it. And in closing, doing what's right doesn't always mean doing what's easiest. It means taking on challenges head on in the moments that matter most. Panic doesn't solve problems, and it certainly doesn't lead to prosperity. Ultimately, it's about reclaiming economic sovereignty and ensuring that the system works for we, the people, that it's meant to serve, and not the other way around. We want to thank you so much for joining us today. We're learning together. Please be sure to download the Rumble app, subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, like and share, and tell all your friends so they know exactly where to find us. And please also be sure to follow me across all platforms: X, Truth Social, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Stay tuned to Rumble for all the very latest breaking news coverage, and don't miss Don Jr.'s big show at 6 p.m. Eastern right here tonight. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you all again very soon. God bless.